This video is going to be a little different than many of our other analyses on this channel, and if you're at all familiar with the subject of this video, then you may know why. Simon's Quest is the second entry in the long-running and generally well-received Konami series of Castlevania. It garnered moderate to positive reviews at the time of release, in fact nearly scoring identically to the first Castlevania game, with a lot of praise in its advances in terms of sounds, graphics, and new features that differed from the first entry in the franchise. However, retrospective reviews have not been as kind, to say the least, tearing apart the game for cryptic information, odd design choices, and most of all, messy translations that threw the player off course. If I'm being honest while discussing this game, then this analysis needs to include the sloppy or unenjoyable aspects as well as the features that I found fun. I would be lying if I said this game is perfect, but I think that's a far stretch from saying this game can't be great as well. I actually had more fun playing this second entry than the first Castlevania, but I also acknowledge there are some horribly broken aspects to this game, which we will address in this video. But this channel, after all, is about discussing what makes games great, and I don't like throwing away commentary on the enjoyable aspects of any game just to join the parade of cheap jokes at its expense. So let's try and take the good with the bad for the next few minutes and see if we can't give this game a little bit of redemption. Everyone has their own opinions, and yours are just as valid as anyone else's, but that's why I also wanted to share mine. Anyone who watches this video is completely entitled to still keep their same opinions of this game, whether they think it's mediocre, or irredeemably broken, or just not their cup of tea. But if you'll give me a moment of your time, I'd like to really invest all of our attention into giving this title another shot with a glass half full approach. Maybe we'll be able to enjoy this game for what it did well, and shrug off the aspects that we don't care as much for. And with any luck, that attitude of enjoying what you can instead of yelling about what you don't may hopefully spread little by little through the gaming world and on to other games that we all play. So let's dig through this curious title in order to find out what's so great about Castlevania II: Simon's Quest. Castlevania II immediately reveals itself to be a much different game from its predecessor, so let's take a look at what's new. First off, you start in a town on a sunny day. This introduction is much different from the dark stone path leading to Dracula's castle in the first adventure, so there's definitely going to be more build-up in this quest. It isn't just one all-out fight from start to finish. Upon spawning in this town of Jova, you are immediately approached by an NPC, though they don't hurt you upon contact, and you can't hurt them either. The world is no longer only filled with monsters who wish to do you harm. In fact, if you interact with this NPC while he passes by, he'll tell you the first thing you need to do in this town is to buy a white crystal. So you're now being told there's some kind of buying and trading system in play. And if there's some form of currency and items to buy, that must mean that you're able to return to this town, and that this entry in the Castlevania series won't just be a one-directional adventure like its predecessor. In fact, you are able to pick up on the scope of this game's new world just by speaking to the people wandering around each town as they mention the names of far-off locations. Possibly one of this game's most recognizable features is the addition of a day-night cycle, during which Dracula's curse takes place once the sun goes down and the town becomes infested with monsters. If you're out of town when the curse begins, the monsters on your path between towns become much stronger, but they also drop twice as many hearts, allowing you to rack up currency in no time at all. Hearts are no longer only used as fuel or ammunition in this game, allowing you to use some of your items, such as the holy water, as often as you please. More powerful items though, like the sacred flame and the gold knife, will require a few of your hearts per use. The items you'll find along the way during your adventure are no longer just individual weapons for you to wield one at a time, but rather tools that all have independent purposes in your arsenal, and as you discover the purpose of each of these items, larger sections of the world will open up for you. Some areas have a lot more verticality to them than existed in the first game, and falling isn't always a death sentence anymore. The verticality definitely makes the structures much more daunting as you climb your way through them, and movement on stairs, a critical mechanic in many of the early Castlevania games, feels a little more manageable than it did in the first game, including the fact they added a little lip to the top of the staircases, meaning Simon no longer plummets to the floor below and missing a step. Since this game isn't played on a level-by-level basis, the churches provide a resting location to heal between each night that you survive, or after a long trek through unforgiving countrysides. The penalty for dying, or even getting a game over, isn't even that bad, however. It's not as though the game sends you back to the town of Jova, takes away your upgrades to your whip, or all of your garlic and laurels, and you've got to recollect all of your items before continuing on your way. It doesn't even send you to the last town or church, or foot of the mansion you're currently facing. Worst case scenario, you lose your hearts you've collected, but you're still exactly where you were. And with how infrequently you actually have to purchase items in this game, it's not exactly an unfair punishment. I do wish there were more boss fights though, similar to those in the first Castlevania game. Those actually felt much more challenging and engaging than the foes you're presented with in Simon's Quest, which has a lot less general difficulty, for better or worse, depending on what each player was expecting. The mansions do have a good level of difficulty scaling, however. For instance, once you understand the existence of the false walls and the use of your trusty vial of holy water in the first mansion, then finding hidden passages in the later mansions is no ridiculous task at all. After that, it's just using the tools at your disposal and staying on top of your weapon upgrades to knock out the bumbling skeletons in your way. The exploration becomes more of the focus than the dodging-centric combat of the first game. And using the holy water to find secrets in the walls is no more obnoxious than using the candle in the first Zelda game to find secrets in the environment. Eventually, you just kind of develop a sense for where they might be. Or you can also just take the time to spam the item button until you've checked the entire area just to be safe. Let's look closer at the very first mansion you come across, the one where you need to be aware of the importance of the holy water item in terms of safely traversing the invisible blocks. If you observe the arc of your holy water item when thrown, you'll notice that it simply falls to the ground at your feet. But if you've thrown it at an enemy a couple blocks below you, it'll continue to fall until it makes contact. Even if you don't observe this before making it to the mansion, you can also see how the enemies who reside here will interact with these false blocks, with skeletons turning around as if coming to a dead end, and slimes bouncing through those sections of floors altogether. So from a final, informed perspective, yes, the player can tell that something is different about the way these blocks interact, and there are even multiple ways to detect where these boundaries lie. The problem with this is that the player doesn't even know this is a possibility from the start of the game. After all, the only false blocks in the first entry were broken by your whip alone and would just reveal healing items, not detrimentally important paths and collectibles. The game's structure is fine, it's the lack of communication that causes the experience to fall flat, if not become frustrating. And it is, after all, the responsibility of the game to provide the player with all of the necessary information. Building a puzzle may take a long time, and you may not even know what the final image is supposed to be, but no matter what, you won't complete it if pieces are missing. That's how information is treated in this game, and why it's so disappointing that it was lost along the way during localization. It's not even as though every piece of important information was lost. It's more so a matter of the fact that the player doesn't know how to find this information. Mostly being the 13 clues scattered around various locales within Transylvania in the form of books which tell you blatantly important snippets of how to continue on your journey. So much of this experience would have been clarified if just a little piece of the manual would have stated, "There are books on how to defeat Dracula, hidden in the walls of his mansions and guarded by his monsters." The manual already states that the vial of holy water can be used to disintegrate walls and floors which hide items. So you have a big piece of the puzzle right there, but we just aren't told where or why we should use said vial. But speaking of hidden bits of information, let's go over a couple of the most infamous lines that the game spits at its players. There are some that really don't matter how badly they're translated, because it wouldn't tell you much anyway, such as the regular announcement of "What a horrible night to have a curse," which when translated from its original Japanese reads, "And thus descends a horrible night." So yes, even though the English version uses a goofy phrase, nothing of importance is lost. After all, Simon is in fact suffering from Dracula's curse after the events of the first game. And this broken English is the same fate suffered by much of the dialogue in this game. Messy, but unimportant, just as random bits of dialogue tend to be from random citizens in any RPG. One of the most infamous quotes from this game has to be the exact quote of, "Hit Deborah Cliff with your head to make a hole." This is where a lot of players and angry video game nerd wannabes will draw the line in their complaints about this game and its faulty translations. But here's the thing, this isn't an incorrect translation. This is almost exactly what the townsperson says to you in the Japanese game as well. Something that was conveyed better in the Japanese release of the game is that the townsfolk who reside in Transylvania are not trustworthy. Some of them spout gibberish and others tell you bold-faced lies. Unfortunately, this lack of trust was not conveyed in the English localization, with the manual simply reading, "A few friendly villagers are town pranksters and their clues are false." So that begs the question, well then how on earth are you supposed to know what to do at Deborah Cliff? Well, there is a hidden book in Brom Mansion that reads, "Wait for a soul with a red crystal on Deborah Cliff." And while this is incredibly messy English, it does get the point across. At this point in the game, you've dealt with crystals of varying colors, and you know sometimes you have to wait in specific locations for new paths to be opened for you. And if you've made it this far in the game, you must have drained a river or two which works with the same, admittedly nonsensical mechanics. The random villager may have lied to you, but the clue book is trustworthy, and the information is there in the game for the player to find. Even the aforementioned nonsensical mechanic of draining the lake is explained in decent English in a separate clue by saying, "To replenish Earth, kneel by the lake with the blue crystal." You may not know what it means to replenish Earth, but you've been given instructions from a reputable source, and if you do just that, then you'll have the outcome that you're looking for. The game vaguely references the importance of these books, when in reality, it should have screamed how essential they are to the player. This would have prompted players to scour every inch of the mansions in search of those 13 fabled clues as a means of overcoming Dracula's curse. Many people with a negative viewpoint of this game seem to get hung up on the moments that require a walkthrough or other outside guidance, and I agree off the bat. No game should require you to go look up what to do next from an outside source. But if we accept this game for what it is, then these other reviewers shouldn't get fixated on the few moments you need to dig for an answer before continuing on from that isolated moment. A lot of the weird, unpredictable puzzles that you would probably look up in the end just require a moment of, "How was I supposed to know that?" followed by, "Oh well," as you continue on your way. After all, this game isn't puzzle after puzzle, because once you're set back on the right path, all you have to worry about is killing monsters and collecting more information as best you can. If anyone that watches this video is considering giving the Castlevania franchise a shot for the first time, I strongly urge you to give this entry a chance. Pull up a guide if you have to, put your positive mindset to work, and enjoy the great aspects that this game provides, rather than focus on where it falls flat. While decently praised upon release, this game gets a bit of flack from the retrospective community, and I think undeservedly so. Well, mostly undeservedly so, but we already talked about the translation issues. Yes, it's quite a bit different from the first game, and there was a lot of experimenting going on. That's what happens in a video game franchise where you literally only have one other piece of source material, i.e. the previous game, to go off of. Things are going to change, features will be added or taken away, and sometimes this will work and sometimes it won't. We've seen plenty of this in practice from looking back at other early Nintendo games, even Mario and Zelda, with both of those franchises having drastically different games as their second entries, and each respective game having very polarizing opinions surrounding them. And sure, the messy translations didn't help guide you through Transylvania, just as this problem occurred during countless other localizations in the early days of video games coming over to the West. But Castlevania 2, and many games like it, are the reason we have big open-world RPGs these days, or just games where exploration, knowledge hoarding, and level farming are all common features. I've played Skyrim, I've played The Witcher 3, and Horizon Zero Dawn, and Fallout, but this game, Simon's Quest, actually made me sit up and say wow out loud to myself, because this is where we came from. This was an important step in gaming history. For all of its flaws and quirks, this is a great experience in a small, pixely package. The existing rules of the universe and its linear action platformer predecessor were all expanded upon in an attempt to create a full-fledged action adventure. It wasn't just the first Castlevania all over again with 18 new stages, but a brand new, bigger adventure with a returning cast of many of the characters, monsters, and items we were all familiar with after our last foray into this gothic world. Konami tried some new things, and some mistakes were made along the way, but that doesn't stop this game from being a great experience and a fun way to continue the legend of the Belmont family, and that is what's so great about Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of What's So Great About Gaming, as we diagnosed the features and flaws of Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest. Make sure to tell us what you think about Simon's Quest, or even suggest a game for another video. If you want to hear what's great about another game, check out the link to our last episode, Pokemon's Second Generation, on screen or in the description. And please take the time to subscribe to be involved in the discussions here. Thanks again for watching. Now go play a great game. We'll see you next time.